everyone. Thank you for coming to this 51st session of Feminist Fridays. We are able to hold this space for more than a year now, and we are really honored and privileged. And because जिस मकसद से हमने ये ग्रुप स्टार्ट किया था, I'll share the theme behind this. हमें लगता था कि जब हम अपने कोर्स वर्क में, by the way, I always forget to introduce myself every session. Shri Kumar, Center for Women's Studies, PhD scholar, and with me my colleague Namrata. She's also a PhD scholar from the same center. हम लोगों ने ये सोच के स्टार्ट किया था कि जो भी हम रीडिंग्स पढ़ रहे हैं फेमिनिस्ट कोर्स वर्क के दौरान, we find them very very new and very very interesting and challenging. हमें लगता था कि ये सब रीडिंग्स तो सबको पता होनी चाहिए. So we and especially we wanted this knowledge to be reaching out to places जो लोग इस डिसिप्लिन के नहीं है. हो सकता है कि हम जो पढ़ रहे थे, these are like we wanted to create a space जहाँ पे बाकी स्कॉलर्स अलग अलग डिसिप्लिन से यहाँ पे आ सके, किसी भी स्ट्रीम का हो, बिकॉज वी बिलीव दैट फेमिनिस्ट टेक्स्ट इज अबाउट पर्सनल रेवोल्यूशन, पर्सनल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन. कम से कम घर पे जाके हम बातचीत कर सके इनके बारे में. तो उस छोटे से मकसद के साथ हमने स्टार्ट किया था. इसीलिए हमने इसको एक लैंग्वेज को हम चाहते हैं कि जो हम कॉन्सेप्ट्स, एकेडमिक कॉन्सेप्ट्स हम पढ़ते हैं, उनको कैसे ना कैसे हम सिंप्लीफाई कर सके, कैसे हम इंटरसेक्शनैलिटी की बात करें विदाउट इवन जार्गनाइजिंग इट, कि हम उन लोगों के साथ बात कर सके जो इस स्ट्रीम के नहीं है. So second purpose, first is to create the space for interdisciplinary scholars, young scholars. हम लोग कुछ पढ़ रहे हैं, आप लोग कुछ पढ़ रहे हैं, अपने हॉबीज की तरह से कोई फेमिनिस्ट टेक्स्ट पढ़ रहा है. Somebody who is reading, research scholar जो इस लिटरेचर से एंगेज कर रहे हैं. तो यंग स्कॉलर्स के लिए हमने स्पेस बनाई, लैंग्वेज नॉट बीइंग द बैरियर. Then we try to create the space open and inclusive for people for all sexual minorities, all groups, just to have a safe space. हमें लगता था और we are privileged कि हमारे पास ये रूम भी अवेलेबल था. So we are able to run it extra judicially, like extra institutional के बाहर के टाइमिंग्स के हम लोगों ने ये रन किया है अभी तक. And today we are doing this reading. First of all, this runs on a voluntary basis. कि हमने कुछ पढ़ा तो आज मैं प्रेजेंट करूँगा, thinking that you will benefit from this. So you repay that benefit by reading something else and contributing back to this group. तो ये ऐसा नहीं कि हर बार श्री या नम्रता या फिर हम लोग मेन. सो वी क्रिएट स्पेस की अपनी रीडिंग्स को आप शेयर कर सके. सो आई वाज ग्लैड दैट सौम्या वॉलंटियर्ड. शी रिमाइंडेड मी, अच्छा फ्राइडे आ रहा है, लेट्स डू दिस रीडिंग. आई हैव रेड दिस टेक्स्ट, हैव यू रेड दिस? आई वाज लाइक नो, बट दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टेक्स्ट. आई विल इंट्रोड्यूस सौम्या आल्सो. शी इज अ PhD scholar for Center for Social Systems, Social Systems, CSSS we call. उनका जो काम है which is about women's movement, religious movements in North India, women's lives. It deals with North India में जो religious movements हैं, and how that's how her feminist understanding becomes important to read this particular today's text, which is about the article which is written by Claudia Goldin. If we know that she has won the first feminist economist जिनको Nobel Prize मिला है. उनका जो काम, I was reading just referring to the newspapers coverage of she getting newspaper, जिसमें कि उन्होंने काफ़ी ये चीज़ मेंशन की है कि उनका काम किस लिए इम्पोर्टेंट है, कि जो इकोनॉमी में जो कंट्रीब्यूशन है वुमेन का, उसको लेके काफ़ी उन्होंने मिथ्स ब्रेक किया है. सो शी हैज स्टडीड US इकोनॉमी फॉर लाइक गुड 2-3 decades, एंड उसमें उन्होंने बात की है कि एक कॉमन अंडरस्टैंडिंग है कि इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट होगा तो लीनियरली वुमेन डेवलपमेंट भी होगा, उनका पार्टिसिपेशन भी बढ़ेगा, बट वो मिथ उन्होंने अपने काम के थ्रू ब्रेक किया है. ठीक है. देन शी टॉक्स ऑफ यू शेप कर्व. तो हमारा मकसद ये भी रहता है कि इस पर्टिकुलर डिस्कशन में वी आर एबल टू गिव दोज की इकोनॉमिक कॉन्सेप्ट्स या टर्म्स जिस पे हम लोग बाद में डिस्कस कर सके. फिर कैसे उनका वर्क जो है वो इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में रेलेवेंट है, समथिंग विच यू वुड लाइक टू नो. कि ठीक है उन्होंने यूएस में स्टडी किया, बट इज बिकॉज वी नो दैट लेबर फोर्स पार्टिसिपेशन इंडिया में भी कम हो रही है, एजुकेशन इज नॉट ट्रांसलेटिंग इनटू हायर सोशल मोबिलिटी, या फिर उनकी इकोनॉमिक फ्रीडम उनसे ज़्यादा बढ़ नहीं रही है. दिस वाज द कॉन्टेक्स्ट जो मैं अभी रखना चाहूँगा. स्ट्रक्चर जो रहेगा कॉन्वर्सेशन का, इस डिस्कशन का, वो ये रहेगा कि वी एज्यूम दैट पीपल कम हियर विदाउट रीडिंग, इंक्लूडिंग माई सेल्फ. तो हम लोग कोशिश ये करते हैं कि वी रीड टुगेदर, एटलीस्ट जो टेक्स्ट के की कॉन्सेप्ट्स है, की पॉइंट्स है, वी रीड टुगेदर एंड देन वी पॉज एंड वी डिस्कस. समबडी वांट्स टू ऐड, चैलेंज दैट, एंड देन वी मूव अहेड. नॉट नेसेसरीली टू फिनिश दिस पर्टिकुलर रीडिंग. ऐसे नहीं कि कोई एग्जाम में कोई टेस्ट हम फिनिश नहीं करेंगे, बट जितना भी हम लोग करेंगे वी डू इट इन बिट्स एंड पीसेस. जहाँ पे भी इट्स नॉन हायरार्किकल स्पेस, तो जहाँ पे भी लगता है वी कैन पॉज, very informal discussion. That's why we keep it non-hierarchical. हम लोग कभी faculty members से फिर बाहर से बड़े speakers भी नहीं बुलाते, हम afford भी नहीं कर सकते, हमारे पास fund भी नहीं है. But then it's good that we can have free discussions. So with that, I would give space to you and stage to you, so you can walk us through this particular reading.
Sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Soumya. As she already pointed out, I am a PhD student at the Center for Study of Social Systems. I'm working on this religious movement called Shiv Charcha that is particular to North India, but it's also spreading. And I am interested in, from the lens of this movement, I'm interested in looking at women's lives in general as to what role does participating into this religious movement play in their lives, and how do they kind of configure their worldview, etc. around it. So, how did I come across this? I'll give a brief introduction about how my reading has been about this text, and then maybe we'll. And what I've done is I've brought out a cursory summary of the text so that we are aware that okay, what's going on in this, and then there could be anything specific that perhaps all whoever has read, for example, you point out the U-shaped curve. So we can discuss that at length in the middle or in the discussion section. So how did I come across this thing was, there was this piece by Sharanya Bhattacharya in the Indian Express wherein it was a celebratory piece, and she was talking about how the time is quite right when finally women's work in economics have been recognized. And what she means by that is that perhaps implying that labor economics have been more about the classical, working within the classical frameworks, working with statistics more, and dry data, not focusing on the day-to-day aspects or the quotidian aspects of women and everything. And what she said particularly, which she also quoted from the piece, was, she's saying, and I've written it, I've reiterated in the piece again, that what happens is she's the changes or the variance in the lives of women are more significant from the perspective of studying economics, because these changes are more in number, or you can say that these are the changes in a man's life would not be as much as they are in a woman's life. So she's saying that this perhaps text which Goldin is worked on has brought our understanding towards labor economy in a completely different way, wherein we are now understanding women in the context of their family while looking at their labor force participation. It's not just that we are looking at their numbers, for example, or how much are they being paid or things like that, I guess. So I think that was my motivation to read this book, and immediately when I read the article, I found the piece, I messaged Rhi and I was like, I want to read it. So now let's start with the author's bio a little bit. So Claudia Goldin is an American economic historian and a labor economist. She was the first female to secure a tenured professorship at the Harvard University. Her work focuses on understanding economic changes in the field of women's work and its impact on labor market. Her approach to studying these changes includes looking historically at the evolution of nature of formal work for women, the factors which cause or bring about these changes, and the significant consequences which they have in the lives of women. She writes, women's labor market choices and decisions have become central to the field of labor economics as a perusal of any undergraduate text that will demonstrate. It would not be an exaggeration to claim that women gave birth to modern economics, especially labor supply. Economists need variance to analyze changes in behavioral responses, and women provided an abundance of that. So this was the particular statement that Sharanya Bhattacharya also talked about. So men by and large were not as interesting, since their participation and hours varied far less in cross-section and over time. Through this paragraph, one can glean the feminist in her, wherein she is not only attuned to the changes in economics pertaining to the gender of the individual, but also sees these changes with women as significant to the discipline of economics. So In terms of the subject matter of the paper, which is titled The Quiet Revolution That Transformed Women's Employment, Education and Family, data sets such as longitudinal surveys, census data, and so on are analyzed in order to gauge the changes pertaining to increased female labor force participation in the context of the US. This change, she says, is the most significant one in the history of 20th century labor economics. The nature of this change, she argues, is a revolutionary one followed by 3 evolutionary phases. So, the 3 characteristics of the revolutionary transformation can be understood under the following categories. So, what were the basic determining factors? So, basically, she is taking data sets from 1920 onwards, or even late. So, her work is, in terms of the time span, it stretches from the later 19th century to the whole of 20th century. And this paper was written in 2006. So, she says that in the 3 evolutionary phases, there were like increase in the labor force participation, and in the economics discipline it was being argued that this is happening because there is more economic well-being. For example, there are industries coming up, people are like, economy is growing rich, so women normally generally are participating more. But she says that there was a point in time which was in the 1970s wherein something significantly different started to happen, and that perhaps led to what she understands as a quiet revolution. And it's very interesting why she is using quiet as an adjective to understand this kind of revolution also. So what were the 3 characteristics? So first is horizon. So horizon is whether at the time of human capital investment, a woman perceives that her lifetime labor force involvement will be long and continuous or intermittent and brief. The second factor is identity, that is whether a woman finds individuality in her job, occupation, profession or career. The third is decision making. Here, the distinctions in whether labor force decisions are made fully jointly if a woman is married or in a long-term relationship, or on the other hand, whether the woman is a secondary worker who optimizes her time allocation by taking her husband's labor market decisions as given to her. So these were the 3 indicators through which she was assessing that what was the revolution behind this kind of increased participation post 1970s.
So look at that was, yeah. So just to go back to the text, and we can refer to on page number 2, we find that on the left column, and somewhere in the second last paragraph, I'll just read the text also. We have already highlighted. It's a practice to read the text also. So in this, we find that in phase 1, where she talked that phase 1 occurred, which Soumya talked, phase 1 occurred when the late 19th century to the 1920. Phase 3, a transition era, was from about 1930 to 1950, and then phase 3, the roots of revolution, took place from 1950 to around mid to late 1970, which is where the phase a quiet revolution as a beginning in the late 90s, where the birth cohort of the late 1940s were in their early 30s, and continuing to present for the revolution is not over. So this was something which we can highlight or focus. And in the second column, in 4th line, which is where she has talked that increased participation and greater hours of work need not involve changes in horizon, identity and decision making. So this is what you have highlighted, the 3 aspects, right? The horizon, the decision making and identity. So if you can help us understand this horizon, the way she has explained what horizon is.
So it becomes clearer like towards the end of the paper. In the beginning, she's in order to set her argument and objective, she is like giving like us a brief introduction about the whole paper. So she writes it very briefly here. But what she means by horizon is exactly like, so during human capital investment, which would mean perhaps, if we understand illustratively, that when we are making our educational choices, when we are investing in ourselves, when we are like procuring a degree or going for some kind of skill-based vocational training, etc. While doing it, do we think of that as a job or a career? In the sense that, so what she says is, whether at the time of human capital investment, a woman perceives that her lifetime labor force involvement will be long and continuous or intermittent and brief. So by long and continuous, it would mean that she is perhaps thinking of a career. So for example, if she's done a training in let's say that wanting to be like a somebody who sews clothes in a textile industry, does she think that she can tailoring could be a career option, or does she thinks of tailoring as a means to perhaps provide her monetary independence, or like perhaps important from the point of view of sustaining the family financially?
Is it like a short-term vision and a long-term investment?
Long-term vision, right.
Okay.
That's what it is. And she's saying that, so horizon perhaps in this paper implied that how the horizon expanded with the revolution, with the decision making, with certain changes that came about, which were very, which were coming from the forces of the society itself. And how they were affecting like women to make these decisions. The second thing is identity, that is whether a woman finds individuality in her job, occupation, profession or career. Whether she can distinguish herself from being a full-time employee, her identity from a full-time employee, then let's say a wife or a mother, or somebody who is in the family. Her identity, like being a working professional, is a part of her identity or not. So this is what she means by identity. Then the third one is decision making. Here the distinction is whether labor force decisions are made fully jointly if a woman is married or in a long-term relationship, or on the other hand, whether the woman is a secondary worker who optimizes her time allocation by taking her husband's labor market decisions as given to her. So in the sense that whether if a woman is married or in a long-term relationship, whether her decision to pursue her career is being taken into account while making decisions of, let's say, moving to a different place, for example, where she would require to move, or is it coming as a setback because her male partner's employment is her employment is overshadowed by her male partner's employment, wherein the decision is should be always about whether his job is being facilitated by her compromises or not. So this is what she means by decision making, that whether the decision is made jointly, that okay, I also have a career, you also have a career, and let's think of my career also as equally serious to your career, perhaps. This is how I understood it. So like moving on, thus the transition from evolution to revolution was a change from static decision making with limited or intermittent horizons to dynamic decision making with long-term horizon. Exactly like you pointed it out. It involved a change from jobs to careers, where the distinction between two concepts concerns both horizon and human capital investment. What made this revolution possible was the increase in participation and greater number of hours worked by women. And we'll see how this is impacting the change in horizon and the human capital investment later. The task which she assigns herself in this paper is first explore the three evolutionary phases, and then convinces us that there was an evolutionary phase first and then revolutionary change, and then she goes on to account for these changes. I will, she writes, in addition, link the evolutionary changes to the pioneering contributions to the subject of labor economics, mainly labor supply. So this bit of the paper is specific to the people who are doing economics, because usme they have this Slutsky's equation, wherein they are bringing a lot of indicators and assessing their in that equation they are assessing that how a particular change in, let's say, an income would impact employment. So she is taking that whole debate into account But in addition, talking about all the other factors also which have not been highlighted. For example, the whatever changes in their decision making mindset and everything. So in addition, uh, link the evolutionary changes to the pioneering contributions in the field of labor supply. I will, she writes, then try to turn to the revolutionary changes period and address whether an authentic, long-lasting revolution occurred or whether the revolution has stalled or reversed. So this is like she's just setting the her objective of the paper.
And her methodology is, I think it's very positivistic and empirically based.
No.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
No, it wouldn't be.
no?
She is rather different from other economists.
Hmm.
In fact, the variable, I mean, the third one, decision making that she is pointing out here,
Hmm.
she, being an economist, pointing out that that is revolutionary in itself.
Hmm.
Because in classical, I mean, in the mainstream economics, where the entire framework is focused on utility maximization, and you are coming to the household, the classic model would even suggest that women should take care of the household and men should go and work outside. That's what the mainstream economics would say. But you pointed out that so like if two people are working, then just decide within ourselves that how to take care of the household.
Yeah.
Now she focusing on this decision making thing, and now when we are talking about women having bargaining power, these particular aspects are revolutionary even for economics.
Yeah.
Because economics in itself has been patriarchal throughout. And her, even in the when she won the Nobel, the committee, they did not do the justice in actually highlighting the methodology she has used. Because hers is not like the conventional way an economics would look at the problem. If it would have been done conventionally, then these things would have never come up.
Yeah.
So it's more like going to the data and going to the quantitative data and bring out the qualitative aspect of it. That's why she would decipher these women aspects, the feminist aspects.
The hidden aspects,
Exactly.
basically,
Which would have been
Yeah.
hidden if it would have been only the quantitative.
So
How you
yeah,
read
in the
data, how you
methods-
read data.
Exactly.
No, and also collecting. She's. I think it was discussed in another piece only. While collecting, also, she went and interviewed people and took note of like exceptions that were there and accounted for those exceptions, and she would do it like all handwritten. Wherein what happens in like conventionally in economics discipline that you have databases for analyzing, like you have databases and then you have softwares analyzing your data. So that was like she differed from there,
So
and
it's like a mixed.
So, yeah, it's mixed, and also you see that she is not calling herself even an economist, not an economist in traditional sense, but an economic historian. So she is
Yeah.
taking the historical data
right.
she calls herself rather a data detective. It was highlighted in the
Yeah.
committee paper as well.
Okay.
So that's how it's a mixed kind of thing.
Because I would see that somebody reads India's labor force participation, and then how whatever data is given, how could you read it differently? Like the same data. We'll come to maybe India's
yeah,
part
we'll-
later. Yeah,
right.
maybe I'm jumping it, but yeah.
So the three evolutionary phases, let's discuss this. The three evolutionary phases are characterized by identity-specific markers such as status of marriage, age of women in the workforce, and the level of education. In the first phase, which Goldin titles as late 19th century to the 1920s, the independent female work, most if not all of the working women were young and unmarried. Their jobs were hourly regulated and did not provide an advancement in human capital beyond their elementary education. The nature of work remained limited to the domestic kind, such as laundresses in a rich foreign-owned household, with few women in the profession of teaching. Prior to 1920s, women almost always exited the workforce at marriage, although some in poorer homes and among the more highly educated did not. Substantial social stigma regarding the work of wives outside the home existed due in large measure to the nature of the work. Jobs were often dirty, dangerous, repetitive, long in hours per day and days per week. The second evolutionary phase is between 1930 to 1950. This phase of women's labor participation in the economy is marked by two major shifts: the increase in the labor force participation rate of married women between the age of 35 to 44, and the increase in the number of married women substantially, while unstable rate of unmarried women. The reasons for the shift was high job demand due to technological advancement and more number of women students graduating from high school. Both the increased demand for clerical workers and the increased supply of high school graduates meant that prior to marriage, women entered nicer, cleaner, shorter hour and thus more respectable jobs. Some remain employed after marriage, although levels were insubstantial until the 1940s. Part of the exodus at marriage was due to the institution of marriage bars, which were regulations manifesting as women's resignation from the jobs post-marriage due to being institutionally barred from hiring. This continued until 1940s. So I'll just read it out, the third phase also, and then we can discuss. The third evolutionary phase, in this phase, market opens up in terms of the variety of jobs for females. In the phases preceding this, their degrees, formal education was not paid any consideration to because the nature of jobs required them to do very basic tasks. And as in the earlier phases, in this phase, the education did not happen on the job. Furthermore, it was Charles Long who pointed out that the apparent paradox in the huge increase in female employment, arguing basically the reversal of relation between husband's income and the labor supply. The latter was being affected negatively with the increase in the former. And it was with the work of Gary S. Becker, who extended the analysis of women as a part of family unit, that fertility became an endogenous variable, marriage was analyzed as a market, divorce was a possibility and a threat point. The family was the optimizing unit with the family utility function optimized by the altruistic family head.
This I was pointing out.
Right. That how all of these different fields, like how this unit of analysis, let's call it, how these unit of the unit of analysis of family came into the picture, and which was very different from how data was being collected before, which would then only be about the workplace or like
So if
society.
you have understood all the three phases, there's a shift.
Right.
The first one was low paying jobs.
Huh.
So can you help us just
Right.
segregate these differences in three phases? So, we can go ahead, yeah.
So in the first phase, what was happening was people who were working were unmarried. They were working as the jobs were of domestic kinds. They were working within the household. In the second phase, education was not a consideration while hiring because all that they need to do was basic
It's
household.
like babysitting.
Right, and cleaning laundry and the second phase was marked by increase in women's participation in the labor force, wherein we see just a second. Wherein we see women who are between the age of 35 to 44, who are also married, they are joining the workforce now. And but so there was this increase in the married cohort in the from 30s to 50s, but people who were unmarried had their stable numbers. Their numbers were stable, not increasing, but the difference was that from the married group, women were joining. And this was also due to the fact that there was technological advancement in general. This is the period between 1930 to 50, so we can imagine all kinds of changes in the context of the US, industrial, economic advancement, etc. Due to which there were a lot more job opportunities, and women, because they had done they were like high school graduates, they had a degree, they could be employed in this. And there was also a perceptual change, if I can call it that, wherein earlier in the till 20s, working outside of the home was considered dangerous, like looked down upon, because of the fact that the nature of jobs were very difficult. You know, they perhaps would be working in a factory or on a factory floor, or you know, some other kinds of like wage labor jobs. So those were considered like not fit for the married woman. But with the coming of clerical jobs from 1930 to 50, it would like be understood as more safer in terms of being like in a clean, hygienic environment. You're working in an office.
Just to add,
Right.
so also the period of Second World War.
Right.
So there was a lot of, it's not just the push, there's a lot of pull factor acting for increase in the women participation. A lot of war economy and, you know, public funding coming into, and so the women were pulled for some time till the Second World War. They were again pushed out of the labor market. So this is one of the theses which talks of that because of war, women are coming into the labor force. They were actually doing men's job because men were out to fight. So they were supporting in that.
Right.
So this was the second phase.
This was the second phase. Very interesting. I just wrote this down.
I read it somewhere else, but I could
Yeah.
read
Okay.
this was.
Then in the third phase, women have like now. So now what they are saying that earlier during the married phase, women were participating. Their participation increased. Married women increased in numbers, but in the third phase, this increase in participation was understood as that once the male member's income increases to a certain degree, women would drop out of working and drop out of formal jobs. But there was this paradox that was brought about by the theorists that she's citing in her paper, who say that this wasn't the case. Well, men, even after having a financially upwardly mobile career trajectory, still allowed would be a wrong word, had their female spouses working. That then became a factor wherein women were pulled out of the labor force. During this phase, then in the third phase, when this consideration was being explored, so there perhaps was a hypothesis set like this, with the increased economic mobility of the male spouse in a family, women married to that person would eventually drop out of the labor force. But this hypothesis did not sustain in the third phase, and theorists started looking at this paradox as to why. You know, why is it that women still are persisting with their jobs, which is not a career until now, right? It's still a job, because that horizon expansion she talks about in the later phase. So this was the third phase. So the fourth phase, which is what she calls as the quiet revolution, is a phase beginning with the late 1970s and continuing till today. I think she's an optimist like that. This phase, Goldin says, was marked by the changed economic status of women and proposes 3 indicators for understanding the same. We have briefly highlighted the 3 indicators, but I can delve into it. She says expectations regarding future work, social norms concerning women's family and career, and factors accounting for women's life satisfaction began to change in the late 1960s and 70s. Some of these changes were preconditions for others, such as college majors, professional school enrollment, and occupational change. Their synchronicity should not be surprising because the series, which is taken together, presents a logical progression. So what she's saying that in this phase, that is post 70s, there was an increased awareness in women towards their career. And why was it happening? It was presided on the 3 evolutionary phases that women had underwent, who were born in the 40s, let's say, or who had been working in the 20s. So what happened was that since they now have a job experience, women in the latter generation had much more perspective as to what could be the degrees that would sustain them in the long term in a job market. And she brings it out in the paper, I think in the middle of the paper, wherein she says that women were looking for those degrees. No, she says that earlier women's degrees were very consumption oriented. And it was they could not make a significant skill based intervention in the market economy with with the kind of degrees that they were pursuing. And this kind of the choice was coming from the way in which education and job was understood in that time when it came to female job or female education. So there was this shift because now this generation perhaps has witnessed a workforce which has sustained itself, which has a job experience, which has seen perhaps the highs and lows of the economy, wherein how some people with a particular kind of degree are being barred from getting promotions, let's say. So taking all of this into account, women now had more choices. They had explored like more educational opportunities. They were better placed to choose the kind of degrees that they want to do in order to pursue a particular kind of job. So she is saying that this is what was very interesting about the late 70s, post 70s phase. And this is what she calls a revolutionary phase. And it was a quiet revolution, and she explains why quiet, and we'll discuss it later. So within the indicator of horizon, now let's focus on the specific indicators which she uses in order to understand this whole revolutionary phenomenon. So within the indicator of horizon, she explains how women's perception with respect to their employment changed. They envisioned their employment opportunities to be significantly different from their mothers. Their expectations of a career as an employed individual, deriving a sense of identity from their profession, made them aspirational about their education as well. As a significant number of women were not even motivated to complete college, and also a few to enroll in graduate programs earlier. Goldin explains this using enrollment and attendance indicators in comparison to women. So now they are like also attending colleges more, enrolling themselves more, and all of this she is doing by comparing these the data of women to the men. So the second indicator is of altered identities, which corresponds to women taking their husband's name as their second name after marriage in the 1970s to now retaining their own surname increasingly towards the 1990s. So whatever was happening in the 70s, what did it lead to in terms of a shift in their identities was that pre-1970s, let's say, women would be simply like after getting married, adopt the surname of their husband. Post 1970s, what started happening was they would retain their own second name along with the surname of their husband. So this was like one of the indicators. And very interestingly, for an economist to look into these details, like right, this is a very like uneconomist kind of a data to understand it and see that this could also be a marker of some kind of a shift that we are seeing. And this could also be a factor that can perhaps explain the labor force participation rate of women, which cannot be gauged from, let's say, your survey data, because you do not have these questions. So beginning in the early 1970s, women placed greater emphasis on co-worker recognition and career success in the factors they believed would be important to their personal satisfaction, and they placed far less emphasis on their concerns with others. Their responses, moreover, became more similar and those of comparable men entering college. So now they've like started to envision their life and their careers similar to men who are going to college. But earlier, as we had I think discussed also, it would be that after marriage we have to do compromises, we have to perhaps rely on the decision of our partner, not do a job, not have a career and just be like the short-term job goal. So all of that kind of started shifting. The third indicator, which is the result of the first two, the horizon and the identity indicator, was the third indicator was the result of the first two, such that the two led to relatively better or comparable paying jobs to men for women. They started earning equal basically. Goldin then explains the cause behind the revolution along with the use of adjective quiet for this kind of revolution. She says that women in phase 2 could not anticipate their futures in the labor market economy and thus remain trapped in the way with degrees of less relevance for growing and changing market economy. But the generation following it was much better placed to make favorable economic choices for themselves. This was due to their job experience and better college opportunities, allowing them to explore economically feasible and relevant educational options. This was the generation that also experienced the usefulness of contraceptive pills in pushing the first stage of marriage. Changes in their employment status pertaining to the demands of childbearing and prolonged periods of divorce as compared to marriage are also contributing factors to the study of participation of women in the labor economy. So, so this is a period, post 70s period, which was quite revolutionary in a quiet way. And the limitations of the study is that this is specific to the US context, and even within the US context, she's looking only at the white non-Hispanic women population. So that would be it.
I think it's okay. So at this point, I think the way you've explained that this was quite revolution, or बहुत ही अगर मैं सिंपली देखूँ इसको तो there is a sense of trickle down कि पहले एक जनरेशन आगे गई, उन्होंने काम किया, ठीक है, they moved to informal jobs या job setting and then they got awareness कि they got अच्छा नए opportunities हैं, नए skill set हैं, you get into those specific skill set, उससे फिर आने वाली जनरेशन को फायदा हुआ. So they were able to वो जो तीसरा वाला phase है decision making में, so पहला दूसरा और तीसरा, these are like following in a very orderly manner. Identity के लेके awareness आई, and then they were able to better bargaining position with their partners. ठीक है. So I was thinking कि इस time पे she आसपास की जो socio political movements थी, how are they impacting this? Because this is also the time when we see feminist movement.
I was just about to say that this is also the time that when the waves started.
Waves are coming, second wave.
Exactly, and all that had the effect, and also when you say that how they started having the kind of education which was essential for the skills required for the market. However, I mean, earlier what was there, even the institutions in itself, they are still discriminating, but at that time the degree was far extreme. So, in fact, in the universities of US, the courses that were given to women were how to be good wives rather. Yeah, I mean, it is there, the literature is there that the courses that were being offered to women, it was more about how to be good wives. Even in economics, the economics that was taken up by women, it was rather segregated into home economics. Now, so it was like hugely discriminating. So even the changes in the institutional structure, how the formal institutions and the informal institutions like the marriage, family, and all these stuffs, like how these formal institutions changed, how the courses changed, and how these informal institutions, like their effect, you see the delay in marriage age and the contraception pills that you mentioned. So the perception of it, I think they all have had the effect on it as well.
Right, definitely. Yeah, and she has discussed this, I think, in her paper, wherein she's saying two interesting things. Firstly, that how during the times of hiring, irrespective of whatever degree a woman would hold, the first question that did be asked is, can you type? So that was all her degree would be reduced to. Very basic, something like typing, not even specializing in anything. And in 30s, we know that a man would get a degree from Columbia, wherein a woman would get only a diploma. Wherein both of them would sit for the same kind of lectures, do the same kind of assignments.
In fact, it it was such that the women were not allowed to sit in the same room
Right.
as the men. I mean, in acquiring the same degree. So there is the school of thoughts where there is this old economist Goldin. He says it was the university had the policy of status maintenance, that the knowledge and the idea of knowledge production should stay with men. So
this is androcentric knowledge production.
yeah, so economics is entirely that. Economics is
like
entirely that. It's not surprising that she's the first woman who has got the Nobel alone, the only one. Because earlier whoever has got with Abhijit Banerjee and the earlier one, the first one, that is Ostrom, she also got it with another person. So yeah, I mean the very idea of status maintenance, that the knowledge production should stay with men. It was very much there. It's still there.
Yeah.
It is still there.
And
maybe a point of किस तरह का courses वहाँ पे women को करने को मिल रहा है. Just thinking कि हमारे यहाँ जो conversations होती है हमारे घर की, I can talk of मेरे घर के आसपास, तो वहाँ पे होता है कि ठीक है लड़की है तो इसको मतलब आप होम साइंस करा दो, BSc वगैरह करा दो. तो ये jobs, ये जो degree हैं, ये they will not expand your horizon in any manner. These are courses designed to limit yourself into कि आप उस ट्रैप में फंस जाओगे.
The convenient structure, which is
so education structure is designed कि आप उस ट्रैप में फंस जाएंगे जहाँ पे.
Right, and since you mentioned earlier that, and I think I also pointed out that there were certainly social forces which were bringing about this change in mindset, along with their own subjective awareness, for example. So in relation to the contraceptive pills, what she's saying that when the law was being brought about in the US, there was a certain section which was not wanting the contraceptive pills to be legal, and it remained illegal for a very long period of time. But because it was the movement time, and because women had more awareness due to the movement, they didn't think that it was illegal to obtain that pill. They would find their means to obtain it because it was basically prolonging their age of marriage, and getting pregnant would not be a hindrance to their career. So yeah, in that sense.
थोड़ा सा conversation इस room के इस part में थोड़ा tilt हो गया है. Shift. Anything else which comes to your mind जब हम लोग ये बातें कर रहे हैं? हाँ please.
Okay, I didn't read the paper. I didn't know what this is.
It's fine. We welcome people wanderers.
So one of my, let's say, contentions in calling it the quiet revolution is because I do think there was a lot of voice and effort put into making the women's movement go forward, right?
Okay.
And I do think that played a role into it. I don't think it was just the market forces and raising of awareness with it. I do think there was a conscious, what I want to say, and revolutionary attempt in at least the second wave feminism to include women's movements into the workers' movement.
Right. So you're challenging the word quiet.
Because I think when you say quiet, I think you make it into something which happened outside the agency of women itself. It happened just due to the forces of markets moving on. But I don't think.
I think why quiet is used is what is the understanding that I got from the paper was she is catering, she is pointing to the discipline of economy, wherein she is saying that these factors in the labor economy studies were not being taken into account, wherein family or a household and women's position in a family or a household is being looked at and taken into account, and factors associated with it are thought about as factors which could contribute to the changes. I mean, it would again bring us to the same kind of understanding, I guess, wherein you say that that there were other larger movements.
In which people fought for it. That was it. And I think it kind of, let's say, tried to abstract the fighting away.
Okay. So
I think it tries to abstract power and violence away from the equation. And that's why I wanted to bring in the question of social reproduction. Where did social reproduction shift when most of these women uh, started to develop more, let's say, identities with their work? And how again, the more precarious work for, let's say, black or Hispanic women became taking care of children and stuff like that. How did this come into play, right? Of social reproduction of women and of all women, not just white women, in this movement.
So this is the criticism of it. Actually,
Yeah.
this has been highlighted that whatever work has been done by Claudia Goldin, it focuses on US economy and white women. But so there was a paper, not paper actually, article by Surbi Kesar in Hindustan Times recently after she won the Nobel. Claudia Goldin, this was published with Hindustan Times. Where she mentioned that in an economy like India, where there is informal employment ज़्यादा है, so उसमें this is, I mean, the whole context changes because then informal setups में it is usually about the double burden, and this whole framework fails to capture this informal thing.
डेटा ही नहीं होगा.
वो डेटा inconsistency तो है.
डेटा ही नहीं है.
इवन थर्ड फेज वाला फैक्टर नहीं है कि इनकम अगर बढ़ेगा तो फिर जॉब, अगर मेल की इनकम बढ़ेगी तो वुमेन जॉब छोड़ देगी. ऐसा हुआ था वहाँ पे थर्ड फेज में, पर इंडिया में तो ऐसा नहीं है.
हाँ नहीं वहाँ पे
नहीं,
ऐसा
इंडिया
हुआ
में
नहीं
ऐसा
है.
इंडिया में ऐसा होगा.
हाँ इंडिया में होगा.
जब इनकम बढ़ेगी.
Income effect is there.
क्योंकि
Income
मिडिल
effect is
क्लास
there.
स्पेशली लोअर मिडिल क्लास के साथ तो यही होता है ना. वंस रिस्पेक्टेबिलिटी का नोशन वहाँ आ जाता है. वंस अ पर्सन इज केपेबल ऑफ अर्निंग अ रिस्पेक्टेबल एंड income that could sustain a family, why would a woman would go from their family to an informal sector which is not respectable? That is what I was thinking whole time when she was presenting,
And it was-
that how in Indian context it would be different.
Yes, and it also has a caste angle.
That's what I was thinking.
It also has a
कि
caste angle.
अगर औरतें फॉर्मल सेक्टर में जाती हैं, एक तो बहुत बड़ा रीजन इंडिया में ये है कि वी हैव नॉट बीन एबल टू create that kind of employment opportunities to
sector में नहीं है, it is
absorb
highly
women.
disproportionate.
That's the thing, and that is why labor force participation of women is so less. Because if I have a graduate degree, I wouldn't be going to work in someone's house as a cleaner, or I wouldn't aspire to work in hospitality industry also, for that matter, because there is caste and respectability and angle to it. And the women who are doing it for substantially low wages wouldn't be counted. And they are doing it out of majboori यार. अगर तुम उसको देखोगे तो they don't take pride in it. They don't want to do it. If you अगर कोई भी फैमिली में से एक इंसान इनकम सस्टेन कर पाता है, the woman would be the one who will leave that job because double burden भी है वहाँ पर and stigma attached to it. तो वो सब कुछ मैं सोच रही थी कि इस पूरे पेपर को इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में उठा के मैं कैसे
It's
लिखूं.
not applicable.
Not
It's
at
not
all
applicable.
applicable.
Certainly
Even in
there
the
are.
American context, I want to think of it in terms of economic boom time, where the paper is based on when the economy is booming. And also,
2006 is before 2008. So
yeah.
this is
Yeah.
before the bubble, recession.
And how
Yeah.
that gave possibilities for at least upper class women, or when I mean middle class
Right.
women to get the possibility of jobs. But now I do think there's a lot of precarity.
Precarity.
Yeah, precarity in it, especially since the rent prices are going up so much,
Yeah.
cost of living is going up so much, where working becomes a necessity rather than an identity.
हाँ.
Right.
And you have to go to work to live. Even if you're married, you both have to go to work to live. And so, how much is that? How much can you think of it in a feminist sense, rather than a loss of, let's say, or in a class sense, right? Where does class come?
Yeah.
This paper is also not accounting for the fact that the white women in US can hire a help
That's
that
what-
cannot be done.
Yeah,
I mean, that's where classes come in.
that's what my.
And that's the question of social reproduction
Yeah,
there.
that's what
I
the
mean, who is
social
helping
reproduction-
the white woman to carry
Class
Hers.
race,
Exactly.
race question, ethnicity question. So even I was also thinking in the same line. There are so many women who would rather work as a nanny in India also, but there is a huge stigma and there is no wage security or
हाँ,
employment
migration होता
security.
है.
But South Asian women go there
Yeah, from
and
Indonesia,
work
from
as,
Philippines,
work
they
as
go there and they
nannies.
work there.
Even nurses from our
Exactly,
South
exactly.
Indian
Kerala.
states, they go there and work there because they are being paid. So their burden has been shifted to someone else. And now we are seeing that okay, in formal sector, white women have achieved something. So
And that's a complete global north star.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's exactly
yeah.
what I wanted to say with the social reproduction part. And I think it's becoming worse right now. Like,
Right,
it's
it
becoming
is,
much
it
worse as
is.
time goes on.
It is.
So what
So it's
has
built on the exploitation of certain races, and it's not just an achievement of the women. It comes with the
At the cost of.
at the cost of other women, which are otherized.
That's where class and race and ethnicity is
Yeah.
coming. Also, when we are focusing on, when we are talking about double burden kind of thing, when we are talking about empowering women, like why I have the issue with the word empowerment is because you are sending women to work, but then you are not changing the gender roles here.
That's what I was
So it remains intact, and the whole double burden thing remains intact. So yeah, it's obviously
She
worse.
has not mentioned the word double burden. It's
No,
typically
because
mentioned
it's
in
not. I mean, उनके context में नहीं है.
नहीं,
Because they get the help.
Yeah,
They get the help.
uh,
It's us. I mean, it's in India where the most of the women they choose for informal setups because उसमें flexibility है.
हाँ.
So that वो घर का काम भी कर सके, घर के अंदर रह
teaching is a good
सके.
example. वो primary school में play school में teacher बन जाओ ताकि वापस आके आप घर का खाना भी बना लो. So your gender roles remains
Along
unchanged.
with that, one more axis जो उसने थोड़ा सा touch किया था, I think the way technological development and the resources women could acquire the access in those countries. Because till date, having a dishwasher in our country is still not a, I don't see it as
It's a common.
it's a
not a
common
common
thing. Even if a family has a lot of money and they can actually buy a dishwasher, woman has to clean it. The way our cooking is done. So everything like cultural aspect also goes into play,
And also
and
like
technological
most-
advancement has helped them. कि वो ना काम के साथ साथ घर का भी वो एक तरीके से ऑटोमेटेड वे में हो जाता है वो.
Yes, you were saying.
And most people in India,
Part
most people in India do have domestic workers who are women,
Huh.
and they pay them very very low wages, which comes into the question here.
Yeah.
And so like the domestic workers aren't happy to come and be domestic workers. It's just that they don't have any other option but to be domestic workers.
Yes.
So इसका तो
Art
तो-
wanted to say. Is it okay if I? Yeah.
Sorry to
Please. Apologies.
Right. So I was seeing it through this lens that how this labor force participation and these other factors that we look into sometimes can be flawed in the sense that we have to look at the backstory also. I could use an analogy to explain this. For example, when sati was banned in 1829, William Bentinck, तो जो पूरी debate थी around whether sati is right or wrong is not around whether it is a women's choice, yeah, is it derogatory for women to for sati or for not sati, but वो सब ढूंढ रहे थे कि क्या हिंदू स्क्रिप्चर्स क्या कह रहे हैं, क्या हिंदू स्क्रिप्चर्स अलाउ कर रहे हैं सती या नहीं कर रहे. तो सारी डिबेट थी राजा राम मोहन रॉय की और उन सब की. इट वाज नॉट सेंटर्ड अराउंड वुमेन्स बॉडी.
It was never centered around.
Exactly.
Even
So-
child marriage
Right.
restrainment act was not about
Same. So
guarding children from getting married. It was not about women.
Exactly.
It was about nation, and it was about how great we will be as a nation if the child that is being reproduced due to rape. या फिर उसको रेप भी नहीं बोलेंगे, it's forcible. तो वो हमारा नेशन कैसा बनेगा? They were actually thinking along that line.
right. So
तो
इसी
अभी
single
हम नहीं
single factor को देखना जरूरी है. उसके पीछे cause क्या है is also very important. So banning of sati it was not directly emancipation of women. It could be again restructuring and re-emphasizing on the Hindu scriptures and the culture as opposed to women's bodies. Similarly, when we talk about this labor participation force, तो women का काम करना ही itself is probably a necessity in the case of lack for money or lack of unemployment in the family. Women इस वजह से काम नहीं कर रही कि women को काम करना चाहिए, इस वजह से क्योंकि काम करने के लिए कि पैसा ज़रूरी है. Not this that we need. So it's
So if I understood
important.
you correctly, you're saying कि अगर women काम नहीं भी कर रही है तो we have to see कि ज़रूरी नहीं है कि उसको काम करके ही वो empowered feel करे, बिना
Right.
काम करे भी वो empower हो सकती है.
Right. maybe in the sense that whatever is the result
Yes.
has to be looked, the cause also has to be seen, be behind this.
So the reason for decline in labor force, we're still discussing India's declining in the women's participation in labor force. तो क्या हम कह सकते हैं कि इकोनॉमिक बूम हो गया तो मर्दों की इनकम बढ़ गई तो उन्होंने अब काम करना छोड़ दिया बिकॉज घर पे रह के नाउ they are probably studying or engaged in other activities, non-economical activities.
India's issue is with the way it is counted rather than, I mean, the way women's work is counted.
कोविड के बाद तो women drop out है लेबर फोर्स से. कोविड के बाद से women drop out तो लेबर फोर्स से they are jobless, they are leaving. और फिर उसके लिए फिर one factor would be जो हमने maternity benefit दे दिया तो private companies hire नहीं करेंगी. तो there are these issues, but I would disagree on part in the sense कि maybe I need to think more on this कि women का काम करना is integral part of their empowerment. We don't have to agree with the word empowerment, but उनका बाहर जाके काम
It's a
करना.
part of their identity.
Identity
Yeah,
formation.
no, I'm not saying that it's definitely labor force increment होगा तो emancipation बढ़ेगा. I'm saying it is a necessary factor but not a sufficient one. In the sense that उस खाली labor participation बढ़ने से हम directly proportionately ये नहीं कह सकते कि for example when you read जैसे जो post independence जो fiction writers जैसे if you take सुधा मूर्ति for example उनका सारा काम women emancipation में bourgeois women पे ही उनके सारे novels generally centered है, which is a critique, but she talks about this कि even when women are emancipated educationally and economically उनको भी वो सारी problems face करनी पड़ती हैं. Although she talks about the problems in a bourgeois centric women household कि upper class women को, but we need to see that even after emancipation of women through education and through economic terms उसका मतलब ये नहीं कि उनकी सारी problems खत्म हो जाती हैं. So labor force में participate करना is definitely a necessary part of the women's movement but not necessarily a sufficient one.
Yeah, that's so there.
Yeah.
So he said एक चीज just I'll make then we probably move towards that. एक चीज और हमने मिस कर दी हुई थी कि जब ये लेबर फॉर पार्टिसिपेशन बढ़ रहा है यूएस में, so there is a counter movement by the men. So this is a backlash which is coming to this, क्योंकि अब वो तो बाहर जाके काम करने लगी, but जो जेंडर रोल्स तो हमने चैलेंज नहीं किए. That's what we all are agreeing कि जेंडर रोल्स remains the same. तो वो बैकलैश है, वो आदमी कौन है जो काम करेगा या फिर कंफर्टेबल होगा कि उसकी खुद की जॉब चली गई, उसकी वाइफ बाहर जाके काम कर रही है. हाउ डू वी सी दैट इन इंडिया कि ऐसा कहाँ है कि औरतें काम कर रही हैं, आदमी जो है घर संभाल रहा है. सो दैट अमाउंट ऑफ बैकलैश कमिंग इन, फिर उसमें फिर रेस एंगल प्लेज वन रोल. तो इस पे सुजैन फ्लॉदी का जो बैकलैश पूरा बुक है उस पे शी टॉक्स अबाउट कि with the feminist movement जो gains हैं there will be a decline in all the gains of feminist movement अगर हम cater नहीं करते हैं gender roles और masculinity और इन सारे aspects को. So they work in complementary with each other, not yeah.
बैकलैश के साथ साथ में एक और चीज़ है, not just the backlash thing, but I would rather say कि if money is flowing and if economical responsibilities are being shared, which were the domain of men had to take care of the family's needs. If women are already sharing it and the gender roles at home, so basically sexual division of labor at home is not happening, who is getting benefited from it? Obviously men of the families are getting benefited from it, and why would they backlash against it? They wouldn't backlash against it. And Bell Hooks, that is why Bell Hooks says that it is so difficult to find a romantic partner who is not masculine and as in toxic masculinity, but ready to share the household responsibility also. That is what she says in All About Love. That I, for the first chance when I got to know these partners who are not masculine enough, I thought that okay, maybe I'll change them. They are so liberal. Maybe I'll change them and make them do the work also. But they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't share the economic responsibility, and then they wouldn't do the emotional and physical and all of that labor also. So that kind of backlash is rather more difficult to challenge, because economic liberation मिल गया तो उससे मैं emancipate कैसे हो जाऊंगी यार? नहीं हो पाऊंगी.
The feminist tagline है कि the revolution begins in kitchen.
तो वो तो नहीं हो रहा है ना.
Also, I don't think we should think of economic liberation as having more money. Like it's about having more power, and even if you have more money, it doesn't translate to having more power everything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why you can actually really
Money
do it.
and not
Yeah.
necessity.
And so how do you have more power? That's in the realm of actual politics, actual violent struggle.
When you say actual politics, you mean the outside politics?
I
or
mean-
the inside politics? I mean, I'm just
I
talking about
mean actually like bringing out it outside to
Okay.
actually like mobilize in terms of struggle.
Right.
This is also, we were discussing it in, I guess, last lecture, that when you talk about these matrilineal societies in the
Mhm.
northeast or in Kerala, right? So matrilineal does not translate into matriarchal,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Even in societies that are matrilineal, the power still resides in the hands of the
Mhm.
male that is residing, वो भाई या जो
Mhm.
father-in-law है. Even if the
Mhm.
lineage is traced, or if the locality is traced through the matrilineal lines, doesn't mean that the archy or the power itself is traced through the female lines.
Right. Thank you. I would not like to end, but if there are any other points, comments, any other question, because these are very organic discussions. We jump from one to another. That's how we imagine the space, and we are glad that we are able to hold this space. इसके अलावा किसी को कोई अगर बात करनी है, कोई और पॉइंट करना, आप रख सकते हैं.
मुझे लगता है एज अ रिसर्चर इट इज प्लीज मतलब पता नहीं है मे बी इट्स अ ये बंद कर सकते हैं इट्स अ जनरल स्टेटमेंट मैं